For some reason, we got this idea in our head that it has to be either God or science. On one side, we say, well, everything we've learned in science kind of disproves and explains away God, so we don't really need God anymore. On the other side, we say, well, I really believe in God, so I'm just going to kind of ignore everything we've learned in science over the past 500 years because, well, science is probably just wrong. But I don't think the problem is whether it's just this one or that one. It's that we think it has to be just one or the other. When think about it. Even if you were a non-physical super intellect and you wanted to bring a physical universe into existence, first, you'd need the stuff to make it out of. Second, you'd have to come up with how all that stuff was going to come together to form things. And third, you'd probably do it in a way that's organized and makes sense. Or in other words, you'd have to come up with science. So then it wouldn't be about, is it just this one or that one? It's about other signs of intent and rationality, order, mind, in the science. Or not. You decide. The existence of our entire universe and everything in it comes down to about 30 numbers. Physicists call these the physical constants. Now these numbers, as I understand them, are fixed values of a fundamental physical condition we find in our universe. For example, the force of gravity or the expansion rate of the universe, right down to the subatomic, such as the mass of a proton or electromagnetic force. Now here's the amazing part. Each one of these numbers are so perfectly precise and so balanced with one another that if any one of them were off, plus or minus the slimmest fraction, in some cases literally this much, there would be no life and no universe as we know it. For example, if the gravitational constant were just a hair bigger or smaller, the stars of the early universe would be too hot or too cool to produce any life-essential elements. If the electromagnetic force were just a hair stronger or weaker, atoms couldn't form into molecules, and the entire universe would be a giant cloud of subatomic particles. If the mass of a tiny little proton was just a tiny bit bigger, there'd be no hydrogen, which means no hydrogen stars, which means no carbon and oxygen made in those stars, which basically means no water and no biology. So it appears, to most physicists, not to all, that since the very beginning, the entire universe has been perfectly tuned for one thing. Now, physicists admit they have no idea how these numbers came to be so perfectly, and they all agree it would be unreasonable to think that it all just happened by chance. So according to, there are only two possible explanations. Either these numbers were set by a super intellect, or they occurred naturally in one universe amidst trillions upon trillions upon trillions upon trillions of other universes that we could never possibly know exist. Now, there's not a shred of scientific evidence to support either of these, so both require a giant It takes about 2 billion lines of unique handwritten code by over 25,000 engineers and a vast empire of computers and data centers spread throughout the entire globe to run Google. It takes over 3 billion letters of unique genetic code arranged in a precise, specific manner written inside a cell weighing less than a few thousand millionths of a gram to run you, a far more complex and superior system than all of Google. Now imagine looking at all that Google code and then me telling you it all just kind of evolved together on its own somehow. most physicists agree that there had to be a beginning to the universe, even if you believe in the multiverse theory. So the million-dollar question is, how did we go from this to this?
Well, greetings, friend. Welcome back. This really is a saga, isn't it, that we're on? We're really on a journey here together. And when I started this thing, I had no idea or intention of any of this. This whole thing, I've mentioned this in the comments, this whole thing has come together in the exact same way that my book came together. In that I just started, when I wrote my book, I just started writing. I just sat down and started writing. I had answered a number of letters that I had received, and it was or notes that I had received, comments on Facebook, and I was repeating the same phrases and lines over and over again over a number of years. And I finally decided one day, I'm not going to keep writing the same thing over and over again. I'm going to pull everything together succinctly and put this together, and maybe it'll be a pamphlet or a thesis of some kind, and it turned into a book, and it just happened. I had no intention when I started of any of that. I just wanted to start writing out these constantly recurring phrases that I was saying on Facebook, and that became my book. And so in the same way, this whole video series has come about, and I'm really, I have to, and this is a great segue, I have to say thank you so much to everyone for your incredible encouragement in the comments. I've been overwhelmed in what that I have read. I'm kind of caught up here because people have been so incredibly kind, and they have said things that I can't believe they've said. And so thank you to everyone for your incredible encouragement. It's been amazing to read your comments, and they so outweigh the folks that just have no time for my opinions and thoughts. So thank you very much for taking the time show your appreciation to me and share with me. People have been so transparent in sharing with me your personal life, your leaving Christianity or some religion or in some kind of abusive relationship, and my videos have somehow been a light to you. And so I'm really happy about that. That's very meaningful to me. I take that that's very serious and heavy for me. So thank you. But you all are such a light to me. Let me communicate that clearly. You guys are an incredible magnetism to me, and you really help pull me to keep going on this thing. And to go back to what I was saying earlier, that the way my book came together is the same way that this video series has come together, and I'm really happy that I've been able to reach some of you as far as reconsidering your identity, which is the whole point of this series, is to help people rethink who they assume themselves to be. And that has really become a life calling for me, is to try and be a light in that arena. And from the responses that I've received from you guys, it's clear that I've been able to reach some of you. I follow the same philosophy here as Porsche does for their cars, and that is Porsche philosophy is that they don't build a car that everyone will like. They build a car that a few people will love. And that's exactly what I want. I want a site, I want a place for us to gather together because we resonate together. And through your encouragement and my creativity, I think between the two of us, we can do some great things. Okay. I wanted to address the recent Terrence Howard, Joe Rogan Experience video, because I don't know if anyone who's been following my stuff, when you see the shapes that he brings up, these three-dimensional shapes, you can see the commonalities between the Platonic solids and what he's drawing. Now, this is real important. We've been spending a lot of time in the Platonic solids. We've been spending a lot of time, in many ways, like Terrence said, drawing straight lines in understanding our source and understanding God and understanding patterns. Okay. In the same way you don't know a human being by looking at their skeleton, you don't know a human being by just looking at their flesh. In other words, the skeleton is hidden within the flesh. And in the same way, I see the Platonic solids as Plato taught and these ancient teachers taught. I see them as the bones of the shapes that Terrence is presenting. And there's importance in that. Because if you look at this slide here, these straight lines, as what was rendered in my earlier videos, shows that these lines add up to numbers that coincide with the shaping of our planet, with the shaping of the galaxy, with the workings, the sacred geometry that we observe. And it is through straight lines that we actually have a sacred geometry. And we're gonna be getting into that in the Aether and the Monad here, down the road here on this video. But my emphasis is this: it's important to know the Platonic solids to understand the workings and makings of the universe, because they are the bones. Yes, they are straight lines in the midst of a curvy universe. Like Terrence said, that there's not a straight line to be found, and you guys have heard me say that in my videos. And so I very much subscribe to that philosophy. But at the same time, it's important to know and understand, or at least realize, the bones that underlie the curvature. And that's why it's important in having a holistic understanding, and to not just jump to conclusions, jump to where other people have landed, but understand the gameplay that those other people observed before they landed where they landed. Like with me, I've had a gameplay, a field that I've been involved with that basically nobody else could ever know or understand, because it's been my experience. But it's from that, the only experience I can truly know, the only truth I can truly know is my own experience. From that, I've developed these philosophies that I'm sharing with you. And because some of you have similar experience to me in your life, be it tragedy, be it alienation, be it religion, whatever, because some of you share those identities with me, those similar experiences with me, my quote unquote subscriptions, conclusions, idea that I present line up well with you because you've had similar experience. That's why a few people are going to love my videos, and they're not going to be liked by the majority, because I'm speaking to people who are from a similar arena as me, and I come from a highly religious arena, a highly controlled and contained arena, a golf ball sized consciousness. That's my history. And it has been my experiences, the worst and most horrific ones, that have cracked me open, or cracked my assumptions open, to be able to see past the assumptions that I was locked within. Okay. And so in the same way, in order to break from that reality, you have to see the bones of things. You have to see the structures and cores of things to find the patterns. And that will lead you to truth. And so this is why it's absolutely essential that you watch that Terrence Howard video. Because Terrence is going to bring to you a world that is from his field. And so he's going to offer you a perspective that is dimensionally different than mine, or anyone else's for that matter, yours, anyone. And it's important to gather these things. That's why it's so important not to shut people off or cut people off that you have a few disagreements with or see differently with. You see, because this widens your world, man. You don't want to live in an echo chamber. You don't want to live in a space that's highly occupied, because you need to think for yourself. You need to draw your own conclusions, and not just, watch the Terrence Howard video and say, well, Terrence Howard's right, that's the way it is. Or watch a Chuck Swindoll video and think, well, Chuck, this way Chuck says it is, that's the way it is. Don't do that to yourself. Don't imprison yourself like that. Because when you imprison yourself like that, you become trapped. You become trapped in your own mind. And as you guys now know from watching this video, your mind doesn't exist, and we're going to reiterate that later here in the video. But I just wanted to mention that on the front end, that it's important. It's very important to watch that video that has this description of the universe that's based on curves, and to watch videos that have descriptions of the universe based on lines. Because both fields are in play, folks. They're both in play. They're both right. The universe isn't something that you trap. It's something that you discover and you develop with. But you're never gonna get any final answers. Just like the final answer doesn't lie with Terrence Howard any more than it lies with me, or lies with Cliff High, or lies with anyone that you guys watch. Nobody knows the truth in the sense of the whole picture, because it's past your consciousness to be able to realize such a thing. Okay? So we're all guessing together, we're all learning together, we're all re-identifying together. And so I just wanted to say that. Here's a couple of photos or slides I made. I specifically picked these because they were so easy to see the common threads. You can see the points are ending up in a similar place. It's just that his points are infinite, whereas the Platonic solids offer a steady state. But I do think, in the sense of Terrence Howard here, I do think that the universe is curvy, and so there isn't a final line, there isn't a final say, but there is a structure within that curve. That's the key. We're going to be getting into that. So to introduce this is Nature as Identity, Part 3B, Ineffable, Monopolypantheism, Aether, and the Fine Structure Constant. Now I'm smiling because that is a word I made up, Monopolypantheism, and you guys are gonna really enjoy what this thing is gonna come about. That happened on this journey while I was making these slides. That word and the reason for it and all the stuff behind it all took place spontaneously as I was doing this, so it's kind of cool. Again, I want to reiterate the quote from Nikola Tesla, our friend. If you want to find the secrets of the universe, think in terms of energy, frequency, and vibration. Just take a moment and think about that. Okay, now what I'm going to do here is I'm going to press play on my slideshow. And I'm going to walk with you through this next set of slides. And I'm going to go ahead and bring this up here because we're opening up with, continuing with the Divine Pymander. And this is the progressive refinement of man's consciousness. Now, I showed a quick slide that I've since changed, but I showed a quick slide at the end of part 3A, which was this slide, but I've changed it up a bit. But I'm hoping that some of you looked at that and began to think about, come to terms with what exactly is being expressed here in this idea. Now, the sequence is pure the Divine Pymander. This is the sequence of going from lower consciousness to a higher consciousness, or from opinion to God, you see. You are moving in a sequence through these different types of realizations, understandings, informing yourself as to how one goes from a lower or golf ball sized consciousness to a much wider or larger consciousness. Okay, now at the end of that, or at the goal of that sequence, is the realization of God. Because God is not going to be able to be handed to you. God is not something that's going to be able to be cognized. It's outside of perception. So God is something that you experience. It's something that you realize. It's not an image. It's not an identity in the sense of finite. It is infinite. God is infinite. And so even though we'll use genders with God, even though we'll identify God with specific anthropomorphisms, even though we do that, that anthropomorphized image, that idea, that projected thought from your non-existent mind, you see, is not God. Because there is no final space there. There's no final word there. And that's beautiful. But we're in philosophy here, and the whole point of philosophy is to, through words, share with each other ideas and thoughts to gain a greater and larger understanding. So this progressive refinement of man's consciousness is what the Divine Pymander shared with Hermes. Now here's the key thing. I developed this portion here called the process, or process. And the reason why I did that was I wanted to really, as best as I could, bring us to a commonality in understanding the import of expanding your consciousness. Okay, so opinion to sense. I consider this an explicit process because it deals with forms. Forms are explicit expressions of the implicit. Example here, the galaxy, a form, is an expression of the implicit sacred geometry that forms that galaxy. But just looking at that galaxy as, say, a child, you would never understand, you wouldn't look at it and think, oh, there's sacred geometry. You would look at it and say, that's beautiful, that's amazing, that's wonderful, and wonder in it. Okay, so part of the importance of a galaxy is the wonder of it. And that wonder comes to you, though, through form. And it's that implicit essence within it that is intriguing to you. And it's your sensitivity. That's why it's so important to be sensitive. And it's your sensitivity that's going to draw you in, because you're going to begin to see a deeper sense within the galaxy. Okay, that process I just described is this starts with this first moment of explicit form. So you form an opinion which brings you to a sense of things. As you form your opinion looking at the galaxy, as you form your opinion looking at another person or considering another person, this develops the sense of things. And that happens through explicit form. Now, since you have this opinion based on sense through explicit form, it's catchy. You're going to want to hold to that opinion because it's come to you through this sense of things that you've made by what you've observed. Okay, and so the next process, therefore, is destructive. It's going to be destruction because it's going to break you out of that explicit idea, that explicit form that you've used to develop a beginning understanding. Now, it's important to have that step in the same way the baby has to crawl before they can walk, and then they have to walk before they can run. So you need those steps. This kind of harkens back to what I opened up with, where it's important not to just jump to someone else's conclusions, but develop your own. through gaining a deeper and deeper sense of things through this process here of refinement of your consciousness, of your awareness. All right. So that destructive or that destruction of your opinion and sense leads to knowledge. Why does it bring you to knowledge? Because you now see the world past the one that you were stuck in. That's why trauma and destruction in your life is so incredibly important. Destruction was important to me personally in my life, and having to navigate and accept that destruction and walk through it and recover from it, you see, that was so essential to gaining knowledge to wisdom. You see, and I gathered that through the relationships, the destruction and explicit form relationships that were a part of my life. This is all the refinement of my consciousness. You can see how when the Buddha went out with his father, or with the charioteer, and he went out into the city and he saw the death, he saw the sickness, he saw the losses and pain. This broke him out because he had no idea such things existed. He had been sheltered his entire life. But you see, this was so important to his development down the road because he had lived in a world that nobody else had lived in. So he had a perspective of pain, he had a perspective of suffering that was different than those who hadn't grown up in the kingdom that he grew up in. And I very much can identify with that because that's exactly what happened to me. Exactly. And though I'm not saying I'm Buddha or anything like that, please don't mistake it like that, or I'm trying to inflect that. That's not what I'm trying to do here. I'm trying to show you it is through this process, sequence and process, that we refine our consciousness, and every single person comes from a different space. So how this speaks to them is going to be unique, meaning how it speaks to you is going to be unique to you than it is to me. And the best thing that I can do is to share with you my own personal experience so that you can better have this larger and larger consciousness, larger and larger sense within yourself. You see? Okay. Now, I just went straight into the relationships now. Wisdom to understanding. Here we have experience is the process of coming to this deeper fundamental understanding I've been describing. You see, the only way you're going to have this realization is through personal experience. No one could have broke me out of the realm that I was in, that I grew up in and spent the majority of my adult life in. No book could show that to me. No movie, no lecture, none of these things. I had to have trauma and I had to have experiences outside my own mind, which was the beauty of hallucinogenic plants to me personally, because they break down thought patterns. They break down both negative thought patterns and tapes, you know, those words and things you say about yourself over and over again that are negative. You learn to do that when you're a sinner. You learn to put a lot of self-blame on yourself. So you go into these thought patterns, these constant thinking over and over again, these same negative considerations of yourself. And that leads to that behavior because you become what you think. And so absolvement of sin and forgiveness doesn't resolve the tapes, you see. And so the great thing about hallucinogenic plants that help pull you out of your own mind, is that they pull you out of those thought patterns and they break down those pathways. I think of it as the mind is a forest, and you get used to walking down the same paths to the water, the same paths to the food, the same paths to the den, and you do this over and over again for so long you forget and don't see the rest of the forest because you're always following the same paths. And so what tragic experiences, hallucinogenic experiences, traumatic experiences, what these things do is they're like a parachute that lifts you out, or a helicopter that lifts you out of your reality. And it allows you to see a much larger reality. And you see your little walking pathways, and you see, now that's funny, why do I keep walking that way to the water? Because I can get there so much faster if I go this way. Think of that in the same way of a behavior. You think you have to get to a certain behavior or a certain experience in life, and you don't realize that there's many ways to that same pool of wisdom, that same pool of experience. There's many ways to it. And the more ways you walk to it in this force called life, in this force called your mind, the wiser you're going to become. Your understanding and wisdom is just going to expound because you're having all these different experiences. You see, you're following this process. You're deepening your consciousness. That's the whole point of what I'm doing here, is to encourage that in you, not to hand it to you, but to encourage that in you, to show you there's the wind, and this is the direction it's going, or can you feel it? Here's some ideas of how to handle it, how to tack, because I know you're facing a headwind. Okay, and I'm like a fellow sailor, a friend that's coming to you and saying, this is my experience and this is what I found. It's a great way to navigate a headwind. Okay, this is all, folks, this is all coming to you through experience. This is why what you can own, the only truth you can know is your own personal experience. Nobody could break me out of the world that I was in, the world of my father. The shadow he cast was impossible to escape. So I had to abandon that entire realm. You see, and that's an extremely painful process because it alienates you from all your friends, all your family, everything familiar to you and that you've loved your entire life. You now are alien because you see it from this different perspective, and this is why expanding your consciousness is so painful, and why people so easily accept or satisfied with a golf ball sized consciousness, because it's not painful. It's not painful. You're not breaking out of anything. You're hearing the same thing every Sunday. You're having the same experiences in your personal life, the same experiences you're having with others, and so on and so forth, because you're always concluding it back down, if you're a Christian or in some kind of religion, you're always concluding it back down to sin. I am the sinner. I am the shaming idea that you're bound to, forgiven or not. You see, that's a thought pattern. It limits your experience. And so to break out of that, what I had to do was realize sin doesn't exist. It doesn't exist. It's a control mechanism. It's a threat mechanism. Hell doesn't exist. It's a control mechanism. It's a threat mechanism. It's a means to get people to conclude to a smaller consciousness than what is available to them, because they get locked in these ideas. And only experience is going to get you out. Only pulling out of that same pathway, that same thought pattern, that same negative tape. The only way out of that is personal experience, choice, risk. I did an entire video on that. I can't remember the name of it. I'll post it here. But I did an entire video on that. Risk, the importance of risk, the importance of not holding to what you've been taught your whole life. Because you stay in that life. You'll never get out of that life. And that's not an expanded consciousness. That's not the world that we're all going to as humanity. We're not going into a glorified version of the captured world we came from and we've been in. This is not, consciousness expansion is not just, hey, we're just going to have the same captured world, but we're going to expand it because there's not going to be any more devil, there's not going to be evil anymore. You see how elementary and adolescent that is, because it's discounting half the universe, because half the universe is impurity. It's both spirit and matter. It's both. It's not one or the other. It's both. It's a large reality. Anyways, we got to keep going or I'll keep talking. All right. Now, all of this leads to an intuition that you sense through patterns into what I like to call the gut mind. The gut mind is always right. And if you look at this, the patterns, that intuition leads to illumination, which comes from the gut. What is happening is the gut understands everything. The gut is the God mind, the overmind, the great mind that is within you. It's the potential of awareness and consciousness that is within you. Okay, that potential is within you and it is limitless. Now, this is understood through an implicit sense, which is the opposite of the explicit sense of the universe. This is where we're getting into deep philosophical, deeper consciousness than just the explicit. We're now moving into the implicit. You see the patterns within things, and you see the deeper truth that those patterns are rendering to you. So you begin to see the same pattern that motivates the tree and the forest to grow is the same pattern that motivates my consciousness and my consciousness to grow. This pattern that was within it from the beginning. its rate of growth, how it seeds, what it is. These things are all seated all within it in its origin and beginning. And there's an implicit sense to that because you see that same kind of pattern in yourself. And I've been showing you those patterns in these videos. And when you can see that, you're deepening your consciousness because you're seeing the underlying beauty, the underlying perfection of everything. And when you begin to see yourself in that, you see, you get out of these thought patterns that are negative about yourself because you realize that was a lie that was told to you to keep you captured, meaning that you're sinful and you're captured, you see. That was a lie told to you so that you would never see these larger concepts that I'm showing you. That only a person who releases from the theology, the orthodoxy that they grew up in, will they be able to see a world that is past that orthodoxy. Do you guys remember, I'm going to jump out here for a sec. Do you guys remember this slide? Remember this? Remember how I said, here, this yellow part, your soul and gifts are your reference and value. In the same way, concerns and emphasis are the value and essence of archetypal figures. Remember how I just said earlier in this video, don't put God into an archetype. Don't put God into an anthropomorphism. Because when you do that, you get locked to that. That's idolatry. Think of the values that are represented. Think of the values of yourself. Now, this will show you the identity. But see, you can only see that through the implicit. The explicit is going to distract you. It's going to set you off course. You see, it's going to be the implicit that's going to be able to grow with your consciousness. That's why it's so important to see God in the implicit sense, not the explicit. The implicit sense of everything contains that energy, that force, that magnetism. That is the same force that's in you. It's the same force that's in the tree. It's the same force that's in the planet. It's the same force that shapes the galaxy. All of these things. And this here shows you that it is the value of something that is rendered through its implicit sense. That's why the tree contains the same value as you and you as the tree and vice versa. You know what I'm saying? You both contain the same implicit sense, sacred geometry. This will make you appreciate yourself and the universe at an entirely different level, because you'll be able to have the sense right there in front of you at all times. And this leaves you in a sense of awe, and when you're in a sense of awe, you're respectful, you love, you care, there's compassion, there's identity, and so on and so forth. You see, that's why this is key, because right there, look at what's happened. This leads to illumination, the realization of God. You see how important that's why the pursuit of this larger consciousness that's available to you is so important. And when you begin to understand the bones, as I'm trying to render to you here, when you begin to understand the straight lines that underlie this curvy process, you'll begin to realize God in a deeper and deeper sense, because God contains both, or has characteristics of both straight principles and curvy principles. Don't get locked in either one. This will lead you to a deeper and deeper realization. Now, if you look at this next application, this is to reiterate what we just covered. How we identify with ourselves is through explicit destruction. And you now understand that. How I know who I am is not by what I look at in the mirror, my explicit understanding of myself. I have to destroy that image, the death of the self, kenosis. I have to destroy this image of myself. And that's a destructive process. Remember how I said expanding your consciousness is painful? It's destructive. It destroys your life. Folks, what else could it do? It has to destroy your life, because it's your life that you've lived that's kept you confined in the space that you're in. You see, and so it's a destructive process to escape a smaller consciousness. And that's what I was describing here. And it's obvious. This is not, in other words, I'm not projecting this radical idea that's crazy. I'm showing you this in real life, real example, real form. And so it makes sense. That's the truth that underlies it, is that pattern that you're seeing that I'm developing for you here. Okay, how we identify with others is through how we identify with others is through relational experience. And remember how I talked about how all of this experience happens through your relationships, the destruction of your relationships. Because you are seeking something past that explicit experience. You're seeking something past the explicit explanation of things. The juice in life, because you're a human being with unlimited potential, the juice in life is going to come from expanding your consciousness to a larger and larger and larger sphere, to hopefully get to the point where there are no bounds anymore. That's the whole point, because those bounds only define the explicit universe, and the universe is very much past the explicit form. Okay, so these relationships clue you in to this larger infinity that abounds about you. How we identify with God is through patterns of implied realization. And you see how you notice in these applications, I've used at the final words of the phrase, the process. So here we have how we identify with God is through patterns. You see patterns there of implied, that means implicit realization. Okay, the reason why I'm emphasizing this is the next 7-8 slides are all building on this brick house or this structure that we're attempting to build to find a deeper and deeper sense of ourselves and of God. Okay, and so through this straight line, quote unquote, process, you see, that's where we can identify. And so when we go out into the curvy universe, the curvy world, the curvy nature, right, we can begin to see these patterns that help us identify what we're looking at when we look at this curvy space. Okay, and so we're going to build upon these applications, this process, the sequence, over the next few slides. Now, what I've done, I'll let it flip over here. Now, I just compressed what we were looking at. Okay, so I didn't change anything. And now I'm going to begin with you now understanding all that. We're now going to start to ask questions and make some statements. You realize yourself through experiencing destruction, patterns, and relationships. You are not spoken to form, but implied life. It's real important that we all see that eye to eye. Is any of that crazy? Is any of that, does it not sound logical and commonsensical to you? That it's real important that you see it at that base level as we begin to build on this thing. So, right at the beginning here, you realize yourself through experiencing destruction, and we talked about that. The destruction of your life leads you to the deeper sense of yourself, leads you to the deeper sense of life itself, right? And through the patterns and relationships, you begin to realize this deeper sense, right? You are not spoken to form, but implied life. And this refers back to the implicit gut mind. Who you are is this consciousness, is this implied sense. Okay, so again, to say and emphasize, it's so important we align here. You realize yourself through experiencing destruction, patterns, and relationships. You are not spoken to form, but implied life. You're not a book. Okay, next statement. Look at the pattern. God is realized through experiencing destruction, patterns, and relationships. God is not spoken to form, but implied life. Do you see what that means? I pause here to let you contemplate this. The exact same pattern for you realizing yourself and who you are is the exact same pattern for realizing God and who God is. These are identical. So what, in the deeper sense of that pattern that I just showed you, what does that mean? What does that mean you are, essentially? At the very core nature sense of things, what does this mean that you are? Can you answer that honestly? Okay, so to make it even more clear, I have taken the very process here that I wrote, and I have colorized it into the sentences to show you this is exactly how you deepen your consciousness, you widen your awareness. And I'm doing it in a way that most every one of you can fully understand and grasp, because nothing that I've presented to you have you not been able to see through your common sense. You don't have to be educated. You don't have to know the Bhagavad Gita. You don't have to know the Egyptian Book of the Dead. You don't need to know the I Ching. You don't need to know the Bible. You don't need to know any of these things. You can realize this deeper understanding of yourself and consciousness through just very simple pattern forming, through a very simple process the Divine Pymander offered. This opinion to sense, sense to knowledge, knowledge to wisdom, wisdom to understanding, understanding to intuition, intuition to illumination, illumination to God. You see? You don't have to be a rocket scientist to see that pattern. And it is that pattern exactly passed down to you from time immortal, passed down to you to render to you through your common sense. This is within you, friend. This is within you. There's no separation. These forces and powers and potentials are within you. And they have been purposefully hidden from you. It's why they destroyed Hermeticism, because Hermeticism was a threat to the church. That's the bottom line, folks. It was a threat. And because it presented terminal threat, meaning if a person clued into this very simple pattern, to have this incredible sense and realization and appreciation and love for themselves and life without any intermediary, that's a threat to an institution that's trying to control a society. Because these people that understand this think for themselves. They don't need a spiritual icon. They don't need an image to worship. They don't need forgiveness. These people are not needy. They're not lost. They are operating on the very fundamental principles of nature. And this will carry them. It will carry them. Your consciousness, higher and higher consciousness, will carry you. Will carry you like a magic carpet ride. Identity is realized by finding the relationships within personally experienced patterns. Explicit form renders implicit pattern. And this is basically outlining, using those same words up above, how identity is realized. And when you realize that how you identify God is the same way you identify yourself, you have to then begin to put these things together and realize, wait a minute, what does this mean? What has been kept from me? What potential has been stolen and exploited out of me? You see, by my own choice. That's what I did. I mean, that's what I did my entire youth and adult life. I was living under the same forms and patterns. Okay. Therefore, how you identify yourself explicitly, form, is the same pattern that renders identity with God, as we are two expressions of the same force. Pattern illumines implicit realization of God in experience. Take a moment and look at that. Pattern illumines implicit realization of God in experience. And what is implicit? The gut mind. The same mind that tells you when you've walked into a bad space, the same mind that tells you something's wrong here, the same mind that tells you, I love that person. And I don't know exactly why, but I love that person. It comes from within you. It comes from a space, the same space that when you look at a rainbow, you say, I like that color best. Who told you you like that color best? Nobody. It was already in you. When you have all kinds of food in front of you, and you choose one particular food, and it's like, that's the one I want to eat over all these other ones. Why? Who told you to like that flavor best? Why do you like that flavor best? You didn't decide any of that. Life happens to you. You realize it. You're not directing things. You realize it. And as you realize yourself more, God more, understand more, as you realize these things, your life deepens and deepens and deepens. And its value increases, increases, increases. automatically. Your love, your compassion increases, because you begin to realize you are not in the small space that you were raised in. That's awareness. That's larger awareness, and that will feed. That's the juice in life. That's the juice in life. And when you begin to realize that, life opens to you. It's not something to endure through. It's not a race to win. It's not a fight to take on. It's not this. It's not this process to destroy evil only to be left with good. You see, that's not what the universe is about. But when you're conflict oriented, that's what the universe will be about. And that's the tragedy, because you're not seeing the larger world round about you. Now here I've done the same thing. I'll put these into color, because everybody learns different. That's why I'm doing this. That's why I'm repeating some of this. Everybody learns different. And so some of these colors and things that I'm using are going to help people see the patterns. Other people don't need them, and the black and white is fine. Whatever the case, that's why I've done this, so that as you take pictures of this and look at this, if you happen to do that, that maybe will help you. That's why I'm offering both this black and white and the colored versions. And it's also what we're going to be building upon. Okay, so this is the 4 statements that I just made. They're all succinctly put there, and then I just simply moved the process over here to the right. Okay, and I've done that so that you now can have a single slide that you can meditate on, think about, to begin to see this refining process. When it's considered in this way, it doesn't require any leadership. It doesn't require anyone telling you anything to do. You purely are coming out of this sensitive space, spontaneous space, this implicit space that is within you. And when you see it in this way, you will not pursue the shorter, the smaller consciousness motivations. Fear and threat, conflict, winners and losers, racing. You know what I'm saying? You will see life that those are just distractions. They're straw men. They're wild goose chases, right? Okay, now we're moving in now to the next phase. Could our universe exist without electromagnetism? Could it exist without electromagnetism? No, electromagnetism composes the universe. It's a force. Okay, electromagnetism is a force. Can we agree on that? Can we agree on that? Okay, that force is what brings about shaping the universe, and we've been studying that. And we're going to actually get right down into the bosons. We're going to really get deep into it with this one. And so this force underlies everything. Everything. All the activities of your cells, the enzymes, the movement of the sun that brings about life, the activities within plants to bring about the Calvin cycle, which sources glucose, which basically feeds the world, feeds all biology, top to bottom. All of these things are underlined by a force. All of these things have something within them, which is outside words, that motivates them. Okay. Could our universe exist without sacred geometry? Okay. Our universe here, as we see it, could it exist without sacred geometry? No, sacred geometry underlies and structures our universe. It's a form. Okay. That force creates that form. Same thing. You see, it's an expression of that force brings about that form. So without the force, there wouldn't be the form. These things are interlinked, intermingled with each other, like positive and negative. You can't have one without the other. That's a basic principle in Hermeticism. Everything is balanced like that. And since the universe manifests in contrasts, you see, it is taking the form of the force behind it. This is why there's both good and evil in the universe, and that's completely normal because these are both forms of that force. That's why it's a silly idea to think there should be no evil at all in all of the universe. That's a silly idea, because part of the expression of God is both good and evil. And that's the deeper consciousness. You see, that's why if you're in a golf ball sized consciousness, my statement when I just said that gave you a cringe moment. When a person says that both good and evil are present within God at both extremes of both, that is the unthinkable to a person who's in a golf ball sized consciousness. They will have to break out of that consciousness to be able to understand and integrate that without any resistance, without having to think about it, without having to get all tied up with it. It's just, of course, that's the way it is. Of course, that's the way it is. Common sense will tell you that. There's nothing, in other words, there's nothing wrong. This is all part of how this whole composition manifests. You see? Multidimensional. Okay. Next question. Is everything in our universe a proportion of God? Now, since everything in this statement hinges on that word proportion, is everything in our universe a proportion of God? Let's look up what proportion means. So I went about and I looked it up. Noun, a part, share, or number considered in comparative relation to a whole. What's sacred geometry? It's a part, share, or number considered in comparative relation to a whole. Sacred geometry, what have I said, is God manifesting in mathematical form. Sacred geometry shapes, or the universe is shaped in the sense of sacred geometry. Okay? So the size, number, or amount of one thing or group as compared to the size, number, or amount of another. A proportion. So is all of the universe a proportion of God? If all of the universe is a manifestation of sacred geometry, which is a manifestation of God, is all of the universe then a proportion of God? A number, amount of one thing as compared to the size, number, or amount of another. Right? It's proportion. Right? So it's not finite, it's a proportion. Here. Proportion in writing can be defined, and I thought this is funny, as the amount of details you give and the time you spend giving them versus the importance of those details and the length of the scene. And so it just makes me laugh because I think of how much time I spend on these one slides, on these single thoughts and comments. It's because I'm trying to proportion them to something that is outside of proportion, that is past proportion. So you can spend a lot of time on one aspect because the proportion is limitless. So, going back to our question then, is everything in our universe a proportion of God? You're not going to believe where I'm leading you right now. Yes, God manifests as energy, potential, pattern, and truth, which are facts. Are they not facts? Is God 100% truth? Yep, okay, well that's a fact. Does God manifest in patterns? Do you see patterns in the universe, namely sacred geometry? We are manifestations of sacred geometry, are we not? So since we are proportioned to sacred geometry, then therefore aren't we a manifestation of God in the same way the tree is a manifestation of God? Because it also grows in sacred geometry proportions. That's why it's so important to see yourself as a manifestation of God in proportion, in principle, in implicit sense. And so, yes, God manifests as energy, potential, pattern, and truth. Those are facts. Those facts also apply to you, do they not? Do they not? Does the sacred geometry form apply to you? Yes. Does the electromagnetism which composes the universe, that force, does it apply to you? Yes. Every single atom that composes your body is a part of that force, is a part of that form, and is a fact. See where this is going? Watch what happens. Everything is not God in the explicit sense. God is a force. This is where it's real important to see this. Everything is not God in the explicit sense because God is a force. So the Christian can embrace this philosophy, this one right here. Everything is not God in the explicit sense because God is a force. In other words, God is a craftsman, craftsperson. And God crafts through this force the universe. But the force is not God. God is bringing about the force. This is real important to see. That means you're in a monotheism. This is what the monotheistic individual believes. that God is outside the universe and and places a force within the universe, but the universe is absolutely not God. God is not the universe. God created the universe. This is straight up orthodoxy theology, conservative orthodoxy theology, straight out of the Bible. Everything is not God in the explicit sense. God is a force. So, but here we go. Everything seems God in the intrinsic sense. So God is a form in the intrinsic sense. Do you see the conundrum there? Because you see God intrinsically in the form, but the form is explicit. And so everything seems God in an intrinsic sense. Intrinsic means belonging naturally, essential, contained wholly within the organ on which it acts. You see? Okay, so God is in form in the intrinsic sense, or God is a form in the intrinsic sense. You see that? That is called polytheism. Do you realize that? Everything is a form of God. Because in the intrinsic sense, everything is God. That's polytheism. Everything is a form of God. We go one step further. Look what happens. Everything is God in the absolute sense. Fact. Okay, look at our bottom statement we have on the slide. Is everything in our universe a proportion of God? And I show here, yes, God manifests as energy, potential, pattern, and truth, which are all facts. They're all facts. So in the absolute sense, everything is God in the absolute sense. How is that not a fact? How is that not a fact? What could it be otherwise? What else could it be? That's what I should say. What else could it be? If God manifests as energy, potential, pattern, and truth, which is what the universe is, then what isn't God? In fact. That's called pantheism. Now you see why I named this, we exist in a monopolypantheism. There it is. Have you ever thought about that? Have you ever thought we exist in all three simultaneously? A monotheism, a polytheism, and a pantheism. And if you think about it, what else would a larger and larger consciousness realize? A larger consciousness would absolutely see and understand the force. A larger consciousness would actually see and understand the form as well as the fact of the matter, the fact of things. Because these other things draw you to the same concluding facts that God manifests as energy, potential, pattern, and truth. You're in a monopolypantheism, folks. And guess what? That's exactly what Hermeticism teaches. God is without any condition, and so monotheistic, polytheistic, and pantheistic in sense. We exist in a monopolypantheism. And I moved our statements up here to the top, colorized them, so you'll be better be able to follow the patterns I'm going to show you. Monotheistic in the sense there is a singular force that underlies, organizes, and manifests all things. So all is a force of God. Polytheistic in the sense that everything is a form or icon of God. So everything is to be revered as God posing in one form, caricature, or another. So all is a form of God. Can you follow that? Can you follow that? Are both of those true? Are both true? Polytheistic in the sense that everything is a form or icon of God. So everything is to be revered as God posing in one form, caricature, or another. So all is a form of God. Can your consciousness take that on? Are you free enough? Are you self-navigating enough to be able to tack at this point if you feel like it? Meaning tack to walk into that. You're turning right back into the wind again. You're ready to go into that. Are you ready to do that? Or you're going to keep going down the same line? Because eventually you're going to get so far, of course, you're not going to be going towards where you were going. You see how it works like that? So can you tack right here? and take on a deeper sense. Here, I'm ready to show you another tack. Pantheistic, because nature is God, the galaxy is God, the universe is God, and so all is in fact God. What part of nature isn't God? What part of the universe isn't God? Sorry, just had a coughing bout. What part of the universe is not God? Seriously. There's no need to live in denial. Embrace the enigma. Because guess what? Sacred geometry is a vortex. It's vortex geometry. Does that point ever realize a finite moment? No. That's why in the lecture from Terrence Howard, his shapes, you see how they're curved and they go out, and that line coming off of those shapes it goes on forever, just smaller, 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 infinitely. And since you can't understand the size of the universe in the same way you can't understand the microcosm. You can't understand the macrocosm any more than you can fully understand the microcosm, because it's infinite. What part of that isn't God? You see? This will give you pause. We live within the creative forces of a monotheism. Everything is imbued with consciousness. Reality is a polytheism. The infinity of the universe can only be God. We are in the midst of a pantheism. Do you see that? This is all the creative force. See, so we're in a monotheism in that sense, but because everything is imbued with consciousness, it's a polytheism at the same time. Because it's imbued. It's imbued with consciousness. Just like the painting is imbued with consciousness, the planet is imbued with consciousness, the star, our sun, is imbued with consciousness. The plants you grow are imbued with consciousness. When you watch your plants, they will follow the sun. That's consciousness. The moss only grows on the north side of the rock. That's consciousness. Tides move up and down in the magnetism offered by the moon. That's consciousness. See, when you can see that everything is conscious, just like Carson said, when you can see that everything is conscious like that, you fall in love with the world. You revere it, you admire, and show compassion to it, because you can't do otherwise, because you see the consciousness within it is the consciousness, the same consciousness that's within you. The infinity of the universe can only be God. We are in the midst of a pantheism. That's not evil, folks. You've been taught by a monotheistic church that pantheism is evil. You've been brainwashed. Seriously. You've been brainwashed with ideas that lead you astray, that turn you asunder, that turn you on yourself, and turn you against God, separate you, and then try to realign and reunite you when you were never separated in the first place. It's a straw man. And so there's nothing evil about a pantheism. There's nothing evil about a polytheism anymore. There's nothing evil about a monotheism, because the universe, you, God, are all three simultaneously. The sooner you see that, the sooner the whole thing begins to come together for you. Without your even trying, you simply identify. It's like you have a gift in something and you discover it one day. Let's say like you're a gifted guitarist and you don't know it. And you pick up a guitar one day and you start practicing, playing around, and lo and behold, within a few weeks, your buddy, who's maybe, a real experienced guitarist, can't believe the progression you're making. And all you're doing is you're just sitting down and playing. But it just clicks with you for some reason. Or painting. I can't paint to save my life. My daughter can paint human form and has been able to do it perfectly since she was a teenager, since she was very young. It was in her. I don't have that in me. I don't have the gift. I don't have the gift of drawing in me, of painting in me, at least that I've pursued. But I have other gifts that Jess doesn't have, that my wife Jenny doesn't have, that my son Noah doesn't have. And they have gifts that I don't have. You see how it works? It's because we're in the midst of a polytheism, a pantheism, a monotheism, and these forces are working within us, around about us, are a part of us. And so they come out artistically, they come out unexpectedly, and this is why it's so important to risk. It's so important to try new things in life, because you never know what you're going to discover about yourself. And you might open up an artistic wellspring that will serve you the rest of your life, bring you happiness the rest of your life. Okay, the Godhead is unspeakable, we agree on that. The real world is spiritual and the universe is mental, so remember, we always need to stay grounded in the fact that your mind doesn't exist and yet the universe is mental. We have to stay grounded in the fact that we are in a conundrum. Stop trying to give it all straight lines. There are some straight lines to be found, but it's not composed of straight lines. It's both straight and curvy. And so you see it's composed of both. And so your mind both does and doesn't exist. It doesn't exist in the sense that being able to hand it to someone, but it does exist in the sense of it's where your senses are sending information for you to begin to gather the consciousness you contain. You see, and so your mind is the way station of experience. It's the place where these things amalgamate, where spirit and matter amalgamate together. And deeper understanding is found of the unspeakable. And so essentially we live in a now you see it, now you don't manifold. And I looked up what manifold meant, and this was wild. This sent me on an amazing journey. So manifold comes from the term, or comes from Kantian philosophy. Kant, this gentleman here on the left, German philosopher whose comprehensive and systematic work in epistemology, the theory of knowledge, ethics, and aesthetics greatly influenced all subsequent philosophy. If you listen to Terence McKenna at all, you will hear him quote Kant all the time. That's how I learned the term manifold. And I always thought it was something a little bit different than when I looked it up. And when I looked it up, it was wild because, according to Kantian philosophy, manifold is the sum of the particulars furnished by sense before they have been unified by the synthesis of understanding. Now follow this. I'm going to put up the Divine Pymander suggestion to progressive and higher consciousness. Now, if you consider this statement, if you consider the world, the universe, a manifold, it is essentially the sum of particulars furnished by sense. Now look at here at my little pattern. I found this description of manifold after I had already had and elucidated this pattern in those other slides and how this came together. And so the sum of particulars, so life, experience are particulars. What you like and don't like, your choices you make, good and bad things that happen to you, these are particulars that are part of your life, right? Okay, the sum of particulars furnished by sense before they have been unified by the synthesis of the understanding. So this is key, this bottom portion here, understanding to intuition, intuition to illumination, illumination to God. Before that process is where we're at, a manifold. In other words, a manifold is not something finite and finished. It's before the finite and finishing, which is why he says before they have been unified. That exactly is the universe. Before you unify it with all these different ideas is what the space is, because it is past all your ideas. It's past your conclusions. That's why I keep saying over and over again, we're all guessing. Because we're guessing about the manifold. Because it's a space that has not been finalized. It's not finite, which is why those lines that come off of those shapes from Howard, like I said earlier, go on forever. Because that's the way the universe is. Those numbers go on forever. Pi goes on forever. And pi is at the center of sacred geometry. It's vortex geometry. Okay. So this was really insightful, which is why I kept this and I elucidated this slide. Because it's very insightful to realize you are in a manifold. You are not in a finite. The universe is not a finished, quote-unquote, space any more than any painting a painter ever does is finished. Any book an author ever writes is never finished. I never finished my book. I just decided to stop writing. I decided to stop editing. But I could have kept going another 30 years. Just like Monet could have kept going on any one of his paintings for 30 years if he wanted. Because it's a manifold you're in. And when you can see it in that way, it opens your perspective. It opens your perspective so that you can understand and know I can have or realize the universe in any way, shape, or form that makes sense to me. I don't have to align to any one perspective, because the universe isn't a singular perspective. It's endless. Okay, so check out this video I found from John Hagelin, and that's going to open us up for our next segment.
What is the physics of consciousness? We can ask that question today. What is consciousness? Where does it come from? What are the origins of consciousness? What are the limits of human potential? We're in a position to actually answer that now, I believe, although there's certainly not consensus yet in the scientific community about that. But with the real cutting-edge knowledge, the discovery of the unified field, the so-called superstring field, we now understand that life is fundamentally one. At the basis of all life's diversity, there is unity. At our basis, you and I are one. And that unity, at the basis of mind and matter, is consciousness, universal consciousness. So with that deep understanding that consciousness isn't created by the brain, it's not purely an outcome of molecular chemical processes in the brain, but is fundamental in nature. It's the very core of nature. We call it the unified field. Now that we have that foundational understanding of what consciousness is, we can solve the mind-body problem. We can see how consciousness percolates up through our physiology to become the consciousness that we experience and see and sensory perception and all of that. So there is a foundation now to really link rigorously neuroscience with quantum physics.
So you mentioned the unified field. For people who a lot of people are going, well, that sounds nice, it's unified, everything's one. Could you dive a little more technically into what the unified field is?
Progress in our understanding of the universe through physics over the past quarter century has been exploring deeper levels of natural law, from the macroscopic to the microscopic, from the molecular to the atomic to the nuclear to subnuclear levels of nature's functioning, so-called electroweak unified scale, grand unified scale, super unified scale. And what we've discovered at the core basis of the universe, the foundation of the universe, is a single universal field of intelligence, a field which unites gravity with electromagnetism, light, with radioactivity, with the nuclear force, so that all the forces of nature and all the so-called particles of nature, quarks, leptons, protons, neutrons, are now understood to be one. They're all just different ripples on a single ocean of existence. That's called the unified field or superstring field, and it's a mathematical tour de force. So unified field theories based on the superstring identify a single universal field of intelligence, an ocean of existence at the basis of everything, mind and matter. And all the so-called particles of the universe, the forces in our universe, everything in the universe are just ripples on that ocean of existence. That's the unified field. And that field is a non-material field. It is ultimately the field of consciousness. And all our separate consciousness, wherever there's consciousness, is merely consciousness by virtue of the fact that my consciousness, your consciousness, are ultimately that. Everything in the universe is really nothing but that. Planets, trees, people, animals, we're all just waves of vibration of this underlying unified superstring field. We are really united at our core. And ultimately the understanding that's emerging will be that there is only one consciousness in this room. And it is you, and it is me, and it is each and every one of us. We individualize our consciousness through the filter of our nervous system, but the consciousness itself, our very inner subjectivity, the self in the big sense, that is universal. And knowing that, knowing it through experience, is called enlightenment, and has been called enlightenment through the ages.
It sounds like you're going down through the physical realms, leptons, smaller, and you're saying at the base, it's not solid, it's intelligence. Why do you use the word intelligence?
That is a very brilliant question. What you're saying really reflects a bias that all of us share. Everyone who's grown up in the scientific world is used to the concept that we're living in a material universe, an inert universe, a universe of dead matter. And because of that, it's difficult instinctively to grasp that we're not really living in a dead universe, that the universe is overwhelmingly conscious at its basis. See, what we have seen and studied for 300 years of classical physics is what we call billiard ball mechanics, macroscopic physics, classical physics, the physics of billiard balls, cannonballs, and planets. But quantum mechanics, even at the molecular level, let alone atomic, nuclear, subnuclear, in the realm of quantum mechanics, the idea of particle is replaced by the idea of wave function. And what is a wave function? Technically, it's a vector in a linear space. Well, what's a vector in a linear space? What's it made of? What's the substance of nature? Well, a wave function, a vector in a linear space, is made of the same stuff thoughts are made of. We're really living in a thought universe, a conceptual universe. Quantum mechanics is just the play and display of potentiality. So the point I'm making is the deeper you go in the structure of natural law, the less material, the less inert, the less dead the universe is, the more alive, the more conscious the universe becomes. Then when you get to the foundation of the universe, the unified field or superstring field, it's simply a field of pure being, pure intelligence. Intelligence because it's the fountainhead of all the laws of nature, all the fundamental forces, all the fundamental particles, all the laws governing life at every level of the universe have their unified source in the unified field. That makes the unified field the most concentrated field of intelligence in nature. Non-material, dynamic, self-aware intelligence. And that's what we're made of. So, as you said, the tighter physics have tried to grasp onto physical reality, to understand what it's really made of. What are the core building blocks of life? At the basis of it all, life, the universe, slips through your fingers. And you come up with something that's increasingly abstract to come to the realm of pure abstraction. And that's what the unified field is. It's pure abstract potential, pure abstract being, pure abstract self-aware consciousness, which rises in waves of vibration to give rise to the particles, the people, everything we see in the vast universe.
Okay, so what an awesome video from John Hagelin. I just watched it again before starting this next segment because I wanted what he had to say to be fresh in my mind, and his focus obviously was the unified field. And the reason why I started this section, the Aether and the Monad, or Aether and the Monad, with John's video, was because this field, this unified field that he's discussing, interacts with what has been long-term called the Aether. And I say long-term because this harkens all the way back in our history in what is within all the, or what composes all of the dark space that you see in space. What actually composes the material and particles that you see, which I attempt to show in this video, that the material matter that we see, planets, protons, neutrons, atoms, us, all these things, are fundamentally one. And they are fundamentally one because they are composed of this substance called the ether. And so the ether is a potential that when crystallized becomes matter. And so all of us are crystallized ether. That's what the atomic structure is crystallized ether. And so I wanted to open this talk about ether and the monad discussing just where does this field of understanding, this field theory, come from. And so by looking at that, hopefully we can better, and the ultimate goal is to unite science with abstraction. That's the tough thing to do here. And so by uniting these two basically polar opposite fields, which is science, which is trying to grasp everything, and the Rubik's Cube, the enigma that is existence, this abstraction that is us, how do we unify these things? And so the ether and the monad is a way to do that. And so getting to the fundamentals when it comes to science, we look at the Higgs boson. Now all of you, I'm sure, are familiar with CERN. and what they claim to be doing, which they may be doing a bit on the side. We know what ultimately CERN is attempting to do, but the point being that their main focus, claim to the public, is that they're studying the Higgs boson. And so I found this great definition. What is the Higgs boson in simple terms? The Higgs boson is the fundamental particle associated with the Higgs field, a field that gives mass to other fundamental particles such as electrons and quarks. A particle's mass determines how much it resists changing its speed or position when it encounters a force. Okay, so what is the Higgs field? Okay, so here, what does the Higgs field do in empty space? A field can fill empty space. The Higgs field extends throughout space. Elementary particles acquire their masses by interacting with this field. It is kind of like space is charged and particles get mass through their interaction with this change. Okay, that's the key. There is a flip that happens when material matter exists, and you see echoes of this in how space behaves. Supernova is the first thing that comes to mind, in that suddenly a planet goes, or a sun or a star goes from a sort of steady state burning state to where it flips and changes when it runs out of energy, and all of this density that's been created within it from all of this plasma condenses, and we have explosions, black holes form, proton stars form, and all kinds of very odd, seemingly outside of physics anomalies begin to happen when these flips happen. And in the same way is human life and consciousness, in that you have no idea, as Alan Watts used to say, you have no memory of where you came from, but yet you're here. And there's been a flip from this existence that you experienced before becoming material matter, and there's a flip there. And this flip seems to be happening in these wave forms that science is studying. And at the basis of that is the Higgs boson, which is really just an enclosed field of energy, a field of potential. And that is what actually forms the proton, what forms the electron, is a field of energy. And so because everything is composed of this field of energy, all of us, everything, the planet, everything, is just larger and larger states of that field of energy. And so that's the magic, is that this ether, this spiritual sense that permeates the universe. Oh, I'm sorry, I don't want it to be doing that. This spiritual essence that seems to permeate the universe, you see, there's a flip that happens when consciousness becomes aware of itself within a physical form, which is us. And so that's what John was pointing towards, was this consciousness that permeates everything, right? That is the consciousness that you experience in this material body. And it's the consciousness that is your true self. Who you really are is not the body. It's the consciousness that infuses the body, animates the body. Okay, well, we are getting now into all these big words or theories, whatever you want to call it. All of these things are pointing towards a similar wave function that seems to be at the basis of all of nature. Okay, and so this Higgs field, the Higgs boson, are the fields of energy that science has termed in order to understand where everything comes from and how consciousness manifests. And that's where the ether and monad comes into play. Okay, and we just covered that particle tip I put there, that it's a field of energy. Okay, a Higgs boson is a purely theoretical field of energy that underlies matter, and I just explained that. Okay, now here, a monad is a purely theoretical field of consciousness that underlies ether. That flip right there just probably happened in your consciousness, where you could, because you can fully understand what a Higgs boson is in a Higgs field, right? So you can take that same understanding and simply juxtapose it with ether and monad. So monad here is a purely theoretical field in the same way a Higgs boson is a purely theoretical field. Okay? One is a field of energy, one is a field of consciousness. Those are actually the same thing, but they also can be different. You see, that's the enigma that's at the basis of all nature. Okay, so a monad is a purely theoretical field of consciousness that underlies the ether. Okay, and the ether is what permeates everything. It's a name for the consciousness that permeates everything. Okay, the potential. The monad is to ether what a Higgs boson is to matter. Okay, so matter is crystallized energy, and we've been covering that. Okay, so what is a quark in simple terms? Quark is a fundamental constituent of matter and is defined as an elementary particle. Okay, quarks are composed of this bosons of ether. That's if you were to cut a quark apart, and a quark is what a electron is made of, a proton is made of, an atom is made of. These are made of basically condensed quarks, and quarks are outside the field of theoretical physics. Okay, so a quark is a fundamental constituent of matter and is defined as an elementary particle. And as John said, the tighter and tighter you go, the deeper and deeper you go, the more abstraction you find. And that's exactly what a quark is. It is outside our understanding of, say, an electron, because what composes an electron is outside the field of physics. Whereas an electron is within the field of physics. They study it, they know how electrons behave, they know what they do and their function, their energy, these kind of things. This is well understood. But what isn't well understood is what's actually inside that electron. And it's just wave function, as John was saying. And when I say it's just, I'm saying that loosely. I'm saying that to basically surmise this incredibly complex impossibility into a phrase that's easily understood. Okay, so as we go to the next slide here. Okay, well, first of all, we're studying Leibniz now, who was the inventor of ether and monad. Leibniz invented the phrase of called monad. And that's why we're going to focus in on him here. And what I first want you to notice is his awesome hair. This is actually him when he's younger, believe it or not, because his hair expands as his theories expand. It's kind of amazing to watch. But anyway, he was a genius, a polymath, a German, born in 1646 and lived till 1716. He was a contemporary with Bach. If you study classical music, you'd know that. So, okay, and he was a philosopher, a mathematician, a polymath, a political advisor, a metaphysician, and logician. Now, if you listen to McKenna, you will have heard him quote Leibniz many times. And so that also was a instigating motivator for me to study this man in understanding what a monad is. Okay, so first of all, the thing that caught my eye when I was looking at who this gentleman was that he was a polymath. I didn't know what that was. So a polymath is a person with a wide range of knowledge about a variety of complex subjects, and that defines this gentleman here. You're not going to believe what he accomplished in his life. Okay, well, let's read the bottom one first. What qualifies as a polymath? A polymath is a person who knows a lot about a lot of subjects. If your friend is not only a brilliant physics student, but has also published a poetry collection and won prizes at political debates, you can describe her as a polymath. And that's basically saying this person is a Renaissance individual. They are gifted in a number of different fields, and they are able, because they're gifted in all these different fields, it gives them the ability to be able to congeal these fields into larger theories that explain all these different fields. And this is where you're getting closer and closer to this unified field idea that John was expressing in his video. And Leibniz, way back when, was on the track of this. Okay, so as a polymath a genius, polymaths can bring a diverse perspective and handle multiple tasks effectively, while geniuses can bring a high level of expertise and drive innovation in specific areas. Okay, so this gentleman is basically a bundle of potential and energy. And he was brilliant in a variety of subjects. And so what he has to say is important and worth listening to, because most likely he had a lot more brains than you or I had. And so he offered a perspective of reality that would be beyond what you or I could come up with because of his genius, because of his polymath abilities in knowing a lot about a lot of things really well. And so it's a good idea to listen to what he has to say. Now, of course, the person that doesn't follow along with the schedule is always ridiculed by the masses, is always ridiculed by the authorities, the people that are in charge. Because when a person comes along like Gottfried, who has these radical ideas that bring about truth which liberates the individual, he's a threat. And so, of course, the mainstream at that time ridiculed him for his metaphysical idealism. Now, first question everyone's going to ask is, what is metaphysical idealism, Chuck? Well, so metaphysical idealism asserts that reality, or reality as we can know it, is fundamentally mental in nature. Essentially, at the foundation of reality, we find purely transpersonal processes, or, more technically, aperspectival and unconditioned consciousness. And what does aperspectival mean? Lacking perspective. And so this is the key thing here. This is a similar concept to what we were talking about earlier, in that we exist in a manifold. And a manifold is raw nature before your ideas, your programming, your absolutes, and all of the stickers that you put on nature to understand it, the costumes you put on nature to understand it. This is a metaphysical idealism is pointing to that space which is before your ideals. And it is taking these larger concepts and putting them into a theory to better understand this Rubik's Cube, this anomaly that underlies everything, this impossibility that underlies everything. And so your theory about that is going to be ridiculed by those who are what I would like to call the establishment, because they have established the laws and rules, and they are not interested in changing them, because everything that they know is based on those laws and rules. So this guy would come in with this metaphysical idealism, and he blows apart the structure. Okay. Idealism in philosophy, also known as philosophical idealism or metaphysical idealism, is the set of metaphysical perspectives asserting that, most fundamentally, reality is equivalent to mind, spirit, or consciousness, that reality is entirely a mental construct, or that there is some higher, quote-unquote, ideal form of reality. You see, and so this guy is going to take science, and he's going to somehow, and he did, come up with this theory called the monad, which united the grabbing, holding aspect of science that wants to define everything with the abstractive wave function that seems to underlie the world, which can't be grabbed onto. In other words, you guys have heard me say 100,000 times that putting God into terms, putting God into words is inappropriate. And so it's the same idea. This guy is taking this mind, spirit, and consciousness that underlies everything, and he's putting it into a scientific basis. You see the contradiction in that. And so it takes a genius like this guy to be able to come up with a concept that we can actually bring about in our mind that aligns with the physical sciences as we experience them. And that's the miracle in this gentleman's work. Okay, so this guy was the inventor of differential and integral calculus, independent of Newton. Okay, so what does calculus mean in real life? For example, calculus is used to calculate the velocity, acceleration, and position of objects in motion, which are crucial in designing vehicles such as airplanes, cars, and rockets. Calculus also is used in the study of electromagnetism, where it helps in understanding the behavior of electric and magnetic fields. Okay, so obviously, when it comes to electric and magnetic fields, that perks our ears up, because we've been dealing with electromagnetics throughout all of these videos. And so this gentleman used calculus, a real science, a real math, to begin to define that abstract space that we exist and that we are, which is consciousness, because you can't put your hands around that, okay? So, what is differential calculus in simple terms? Lesson summary. Differential calculus is the study of the instantaneous rate of change of a function. This type of rate of change looks at how much the slope of a function changes, and it can be used to analyze minute changes, this is the critical part, minute changes at a single point of the function. And what are we? We are a wave function, according to John. Okay, so this is his theory analyzes minute changes within that wave function that we are, you see? And he came up with the idea of the monad. Okay, so what is integral calculus in simple terms? The basic idea of integral calculus is finding the area under a curve. Remember at the beginning of the video, this video, when I encouraged you to watch that interview between Joe Rogan and, what was his name? Howard, I think it's Howard. I'm sorry if I'm wrong, but anyways, remember the objects that he came up with, the Platonic solids, the different interpretation of the Platonic solids and how they were curved. Okay. Integral calculus deals with the area that is under that curve. And so when Howard was explaining in the smallest and smallest and smallest terms of what reality is, this is a study of those terms. Integral calculus will allow a person mathematically to go into that space of abstraction and begin to make sense of it. And that's exactly what this gentleman did. Okay, so I made this little graph to hopefully help clarify this concept of the ether and monad. So as you look at this graph, think of all the area that is outside that orange portion as uncrystallized ether or uncondensed consciousness. Okay, and then consider the orange area. Think of that area as what composes the material world of time, space, matter, and finite. So this would be crystallized or condensed ether. Now see, both spaces are ether. One is condensed and one is uncondensed, or one is crystallized, there in the orange, and one is uncrystallized or uncondensed. Okay, so integral calculus allows for there to be a calculation, an estimation, a measure of the area that is condensed, of the consciousness that is condensed in what is called, and what Leibniz termed, the monad. And so monads both compose the uncrystallized ether, the uncondensed consciousness, as well as crystallized ether or condensed consciousness. Think of it like condensing air. If I condense oxygen, it eventually becomes liquid oxygen because I've compressed the molecules, the oxygen molecules, so tightly. And it's the exact same concept with existence. Consciousness has condensed so much so that it has become matter, namely you, me, the universe, everything. So by dividing that orange space, or condensed consciousness, into infinitely small shapes, you can know that space more fluently. You see? Because the way your articulating mind works, you can better conceive of something by dividing it into smaller and smaller and smaller condensations, so that you can know the crystallized and the uncrystallized ether simultaneously. That you not only know this, but you are them both. Your life existence, now you see it, now you don't, is a state of uncrystallized and crystallized ether, or uncrystallized and crystallized consciousness. As I was doing this research, I came across this quote from Stephen Greer, and he said, "The energy contained in the ether of a coffee cup could boil off all the world's oceans." Do you realize what that means? The amount of energy, literally, I got one right here, in this little coffee cup right here. You could burn off the ether that contains within the space of that coffee cup, could burn off, has enough energy to boil off all of the oceans on the planet. Okay, that's just one coffee cup. And what forms you, what forms the tree, the universe, the planet, everything, is that substance, non-substance, ether. That's the potential in there. That's the amazing aspect of this quote from Greer, is that this potential he's talking about is what permeates everything. And so this idea of having a quote-unquote energy crisis right now is silly, because all the energy that obviously society would ever need is contained within the size of a coffee cup. You see, and it's simply a matter of harnessing that. And that's what this gentleman was attempting to do here. Okay. Leibniz claimed that, let's not miss it. Notice the hair? See, the hair has grown and it's gotten larger. He's becoming less apologetic. Leibniz claimed that monads are a direct result of movements of consciousness. That is to say, consciousness creates waves of energy. Remember, Hagen said wave function. That's what everything is. Consciousness creates waves of energy. You could also read this as consciousness creates wave function. Waves of energy. These combine with other like waves. Upon critical mass, these combinations of consciousness waves crystallize and form physical reality, events in time, and matter in space. And this is what I was talking about earlier. Events in time and matter in space are combinations of waves of consciousness, crystallized consciousness. That's what actually composes everything. Wave function, consciousness waves crystallizing. It's exactly, this is makes it so easy for you to understand. It's exactly like if you had an idea, and I think I've used this description before, if you had an idea in your head from your imagination, it didn't exist, and your imagination, your consciousness came up with the idea. And you can take, by aligning your thoughts and aligning this idea with your science, with creativity, and all these other elements that contribute, you can manifest this idea in your head. You have taken something that doesn't exist, an idea, a form of energy, and you transformed it into a crystallized form of energy, into something that you've invented. Okay? And remember, nature works in patterns and habits. And so consciousness comes about in the same way. The universe is an expression of the creativity of this unified field, this consciousness that permeates everything, the ether. The universe is an expression of the ether. In the same way, you are an expression of the ether. Can you see that connection? This will help you understand who you are. The more intense the movements of consciousness and the greater number of monads there are, the higher likelihood they will manifest into physical reality. And that's exactly what you are. That's exactly what the planet is. That's exactly what the universe is, like I just explained. Potential that is manifested, and it is manifested because of the concrescence that brings about reality. A concrescence of what? Of consciousness, densified into matter, into crystallized matter. And that's what we are. That's what everything is. Okay, so Leibniz, this genius, came up with the idea that the monad is that crystallized form, or that crystallized waveform or potential that comes out of the ether, and that also composes the ether. And that's the critical aspect of this. All of this theory lines up with Bruce Lipton's epigenetics. We become what we think. That reflects that quote, or that phrase, that thought phrase from Bruce, reflects what I just talked about with the imagination. You bring into reality what you think. So that's why if you have a low view of yourself, meaning that if you think you're a born sinner, or you're born inadequate, or born needing to be saved, right? You will become that. You will behave like that. That's how thinking of yourself as a sinner, or thinking of yourself as coming from nothing for no reason, like you're just from a slime on the side of a pool that got hit by lightning, like science will tell you, right? You become these ideas because that's what you think you are. This is how science and religion brainwash the individual. You see, that's why they should be seen simply as tools to instruct, to help you understand, not something to base your life on. That's the critical aspect of this, because your mind must remain free, because you become what you think. And since you have unlimited potential, your mind must be free in order for that potential to come out, because it's not limited. You see, this follows also in line with Rupert Sheldrake's morphogenesis. Nature renders novelty through habits, and I talked about that just a second ago, where I talked about how the flip happens, in that there is a flip that happens from non-reality to reality. In the same way, there's a flip that happens with a star that goes from this bright object to a black hole. There's a flip that occurs. And this flipping, this changing, this spinning action of nothing ever being the same, and everything emerging and complexifying constantly. You see, these are all habits of nature. And so you manifested in the same way. From ultimate consciousness, you became an individualized consciousness. You see? And it is through this morphogenesis, this epigenetics, that you come into reality. In the same way, Terence McKenna's credo, nature loves courage. These two aspects, epigenetics and morphogenesis, are courageous endeavors. Because you become what you think. And so when you realize your unlimited potential, it takes a courageous person to walk into that space and realize there's nothing that you can't do because of the responsibility that goes with that. You see, it's a heavy thought. You see, these are heavy concepts that will move you from an adolescent perspective of yourself and a spoon-fed perspective of yourself to an adult perspective of yourself that's free, that's not spoon-fed, that understands through experience and patterns and wave function. You see, this is all really good stuff to consider. And then finally, we have our last picture of Leibniz. Look at this wave. This is 1980s in 1710. Truly amazing. Okay, the ether, medium, or matrix potential flows as a whole. It is composed of ether strata, individualized monads. Ether can be thought of as consciousness layers composed of the unspeakable monad. After the waves of potential ether have built up to reach critical mass, they begin to effectuate physical reality through vortex geometry. From ineffable comes the effable. From chaos comes the sacred. And in case you didn't know what effectuate means, put into force or operation. And this really reflects well what we've been talking about, in that this concretizing in a very real sense of consciousness effectuates, put into force or operation, material reality. And this is how the universe becomes this unlimited potential that manifests as it condenses. And you could really see all of reality as condensation of consciousness. And I think I've mentioned that before in my lectures. Leibniz believed there were no interactions between different monads, but everything is regulated by pre-established harmony. And this really spoke to me as the Tao of itself. So, and if you've read anything from Watts, you'll be well familiar with the Tao, in that the Tao doesn't have a boss. And the Tao is simply of itself so. It has all potential, all knowledge, wisdom, everything within it. And it simply is, in the same way nature simply is. It doesn't need to be fixed. There's nothing wrong with it. Everything is perfectly fine. Everything is perfect, actually, because it can't be otherwise, because everything is based on perfection, which is vortex geometry, the math of God. You could really see the universe, and when they look out and they take those shots of all those different dots of all these different galaxies, you can really see that as a brain. You can really see that as neurology, because your neurons operate the same way. They have these extending arms that come out in the same way. These planetary systems have planetary arms that come out of them, spiral nebulae. Again, you see these habits in nature. It just is everywhere. If you begin to capture some of these different concepts in these different realms, you won't believe how much their patterns mimic each other. You can't believe it. And it becomes so apparent in that you realize there's no such thing as coincidence. And then you realize, well, if there's no such thing as coincidence, and the world is, and the universe is as complex as it is, there's no words for it. And to think you could harness it, to think you could bring it down into a science or a religion or a God is crazy. It's crazy. It's a coping mechanism is what that is. And you don't want to do that. You don't want to base your life on a coping mechanism. Okay. So first of all, what is ether? Source potential, metaphysical potential that fills the universe. Derived from the Greek metaphysica, after the things of nature, referring to an idea, doctrine, or posited reality outside of human sense perception. In modern philosophical terminology, metaphysics refers to the studies of what cannot be reached through objective studies of material reality. Okay, so metaphysical allows us to consider the essence of nature without harnessing nature, locking nature down, but metaphysically considering it, which is this state of allowance. It's a thought process that allows the substance, the essence, whatever it is that you're studying, to expand as it will, because it is of itself so. Okay, so I found these unique examples of the quirkiness of nature. Now, what you're looking at there on the bottom left is called a Mobius strip. Now watch the ball. Now do you notice that that is not physically possible? A ring doesn't, you can't flip onto both sides of a ring like that. But see, this shows you that reality is outside of what you assume to be real. It's outside of what you presume to know and understand. And it is graphs like this that help you understand that. This top right here is showing the toroidal energies, how a toroidal field looks. You can see right there. You can see how it forms there on the left, how it was started as a spiral of vortex geometry. That's what you're looking at there. Okay. Ether is invisible, infinite, alive, intelligent, self-organizing, and highly ordered. Unifies all points and layers in space, existence, and consciousness. Fractal holographic in its storage of information. Occupies all spatial interstices, filling the emptiness of atoms and the universe itself. This talks about the quarks. Remember, even quarks are particulars. And the ether is past those particulars. It forms the particulars, the quarks, but then it is also the space that the quarks are within. And that's what you notice is that as you get tighter and tighter and tighter in on what the substance of everything is, everything gets spread out further and further. Like the typeface of a newspaper, it looks completely legible when you look at it from a couple feet. But when you get in a microscope and get tighter and tighter, eventually it just looks like blobs of color. And then it eventually just looks like atoms. And then it eventually just looks like quarks. And then it eventually, you see, it just keeps going down and down and down. And the space gets more and more larger because the space between the quarks gets larger and larger as you go smaller and smaller and smaller. It never ends. In the same way, space, the universe, never ends. And most likely there are unlimited trillions and trillions and multiple trillions and trillions and trillions of universes. Why wouldn't there be? And in a very real sense, you could see all of the universe as simply one neuron in the mind of God, rather than all of space is all the mind of God. It's just one neuron in the scope of God. You see how it gets really funny when you continue to try and squish God into a religion, a science, a theory, an idea. You see, it just you're in the same conundrum as the person who is trying to get to the bottom of everything and discovers that there's just more and more abstraction the deeper and deeper you go. You see, there's a reason for that, and this is the pattern that is inherent to nature. All potential fields arise from this medium that is no medium, obviously the ether we're talking about here, manifests matter through plasma, that which sees material universe. And we've talked about this before, how plasma contains within it all of the material essence necessary for the universe, propagates in waves, and is observed in patterns and habits. Okay, so ether, because we can't give it a final definition, just simply exemplifies these thoughts that I've offered you. And it's obviously past these things. But the point being that we are to stand in awe, essentially. Not like someone's telling you to stand in awe, but this should cause a person to stand in awe. And if it doesn't, then you haven't realized what you are actually reading and seeing here, because this is what composes you. And that is a depth that can never be fully delved. Okay, continuing to the monad. Infinity and enigma. Individuated consciousness that reunites. Now I've got this little video on the left here. These are going to be the platonic solids, and this is going to basically show you the mathematical derivatives of the platonic solids and what they look like in real matter. This is what composes the universe. Look at the brilliance. It is all thought, yet is unspeakable, the Monads are to ether what ions are to plasma. The ether is liberated monads, plasma is liberated ions, basically liberated electrons. We've talked about this before. And so think of the ether as liberated monads. Think of it in the same terms as plasma. And again, we see patterns in nature. The ether is liberated monads, plasma is liberated ions. And we see the same pattern, these two abstractions, quote unquote, but they're doing the same thing. They're essentially doing the same thing. They're transmogrifying one form of energy into another form of energy. And yes, it is a magical process. The ether is the monadic medium. It is the receptacle of which Plato speaks. We'll talk about that in a sec. It is the vessel, the process of creation, that which individualizes consciousness and that which reunites consciousness. And let's go quick here to the next slide so you can see this idea of the receptacle. Okay, according to Plato, which is a feature of a receptacle? It is where things appear and perish. Ooh, that's pretty heavy. It is where things appear and perish. What have I been saying all of reality is? Now you see it, now you don't. Now you see it, now you don't. That's what all of the universe is doing. It's playing a game with you. It's playing a game of hide and seek. Truly. It is playing a game of hide and seek. And the game of hide and seek is, you are consciousness, yet you don't know it. Because consciousness hides like that. It's coy, because consciousness is nature. Okay, but that's your composition. And so that's the enigma right there. You are in a place where things appear and perish. So in other words, as soon as you get a good concept and a good theory, it's going to perish because you're going to see something deeper. And the universe will keep doing that. Monads are individuated consciousness. In the same way, matter is crystallized ether, just as nature is a caricature of God. When you can start to see God outside of any religious sense, it's amazing how much more beautiful and expansive the concept of God becomes. Because you're not bringing God back down into a finite, but you're able to release with these ideas that God is this space where things appear and perish. It's a receptacle. Remember, I talked about the vessel that is your mind, and you become what you pour into the vessel. Whatever you allow into the vessel is what you become, because that is your mind. And why it is so important to never have a full vessel for your mind, because then you can't learn anything. And that's exactly what I'm talking about here. This concept of God outside of religion allows you to learn of, know of, be in contact with, relation with, in identity with a essence that is no essence, a form that is no form. And this liberates you, because it's the truth of the matter, and the truth is past any religious, scientific theory. You see? Every monad within the strata behaves independently of other monads, yet every monad is synchronized with another by divinity. This idea could refer to the composition of the ether medium as not predestined, but an unfolding enigma. And what better example of that than these starlings? You can think of each one of those little birds that you see as a monad. And those little monads, those little birds, compose the ether. And you can think of the morphing form that the birds form there as ether. Ether that is crystallizing. It is moving from just a consciousness state in the bird's mind into a reality state in the bird's flight. Can you see that? And this happens of itself. So those birds are not thinking in the sense of, I'm going to turn this way and that way. They are moving with the threshold reality that they are a part of and forming. So thought is late. Once the bird thinks, it's too late. If the bird thinks, okay, I got to turn here, it's too late. the movement happens, the bird simply knows. Your immune system works the same way. It simply knows. It doesn't need directives. It doesn't need anything to tell it what to do. It knows what to do. In the same way that bird or these birds know what to do. And they form this enigma, this morphing essence, right? Simply by being. That's all the bird is quote unquote doing. It's simply being, not thinking. And this is where it's important to realize any thought you have about God is less than God. So, because God is past thought. And so monads and ether are simply a way of considering this this unstructurable idea called God. I know this stuff is heavy. I'm trying to hit a number of different points in this concept so that hopefully one of those points will ring a bell in your mind, will ring a bell of awareness, will spark a thought in your mind that's past the way you've always seen or understood or thought about God. That's the point of this.
By explaining the universe as a continuum based on a geometrical process of energy exchange, this video explains a reason for the fine structure constant 137. This process of energy exchange is formed by the spontaneous absorption and emission of light photon energy. Therefore, the fine structure constant is linked to the speed of light, or what is called the light constant c. Within the atom, the fine structure constant is also linked to the Planck constant and the charge of the electron squared. These three constants form the fine structure constant, and it is surprising how much information we have to explain the fine structure constant as part of a dynamic geometrical process. We know that the electron is spherical, and with this info we know that we have to square the radius of the sphere to get the surface area. Therefore we have a square of charge as a constant within this geometrical process. We also have the Planck constant, linked to 2 pi, representing one rotation of the sphere. This is quite a lot of geometrical information to draw a picture of what is actually happening. The dynamic part of this process is divided into 2 parts in the form of the absorption and emission of light. The mathematics and geometry we will use to explain this part of the process we will take from the golden ratio. The mathematics of the golden ratio is divided into 2 parts, A and B. This can represent the absorption and emission of light, photon energy, that forms a process of continuous energy exchange. This can be put into geometrical form by taking the 2 ends of the line and joining them together to form a circle. If we then place a point in the center of the circle and draw lines out across the radius to the A and B on the surface of the sphere, the angle formed at the center is the golden angle, 137.5 degrees. Mathematically, we have to square section A to form the golden rectangle out of section B. If we continuously repeat this process with smaller and smaller rectangles, we form the Fibonacci spiral. And this is exactly what we have within this process. We have a square in the form of the charge of the electron being squared, with the spontaneous absorption and emission of light, photon energy, forming a repetition of the process. In this theory, the fine structure constant, as part of a geometrical process, forms the golden angle, and with it the Fibonacci spiral that we see almost everywhere in nature.
Okay, I started this next section with the fine structure constant video, because what the fine structure constant is doing is it is taking the ether and the monad, and it is putting math into these essential understandings of the fundamentals of nature. And so by putting this symbol and mathematics behind it, it helps some folks better conceptualize and understand just what the ether and monad are. And they are contained within what is called the fine structure constant. And the fine structure constant is the mathematics that underlies the behavior of the ether and monad. Does that make sense? I hope that makes sense. And so there's an actual mathematics called vortex geometry that the ether and monad seem to follow. It's a rhythm, it's a pattern that nature follows, and it can be mapped in mathematics, and that's what the fine structure constant is. Introduced into physics in 1916, the alpha constant, also known as the fine structure constant, has been discussed for decades. Okay, now look at this. Monads self-organize into constants. The light constant, speed; the electric constant, current and power; the Planck constant, action realized. These constants form the fine structure constant, which conveys the natural laws that charge, magnetize, shape, and promulgate the universe. Okay, the reason why, remember when I played that segment of Rupert Sheldrake describing when he went and talked to that physicist that claimed that the light constant, the light speed constant was a constant. And Sheldrake came in and was saying, no, it's not constant. It's actually fluctuated slightly over the decades, which most likely means that it's fluctuated well before we began measuring it. And the science guy was like, no, the light speed is constant. And the reason why he wants light speed to be a constant is because it fits in this formula. Now, you can see both sides. Don't take a side here. Look at both sides. You can see why he's fighting to keep it a constant, because this keeps our understanding of this etheric realm intact. But if you come along and say that the light constant fluctuates, this mathematical formula begins to fall apart. Okay, and nature wants that because nature's coy. It's playing hide and seek because we're in a now you see it, now you don't reality. And so nature's not going to be down with being tied down. So you have to have some leeway here, and this is where the mathematician doesn't want this. You have to have some wiggliness in your straight lines in order to understand something like this. Okay? And so that's why the physicist doesn't want Rupert coming in and saying that the light constant doesn't exist, because it destroys the physicist's worldview, their understanding of material matter. Okay? So you and I can remain outside of that authority with our free mind, and we allow this, and we look at this, and we allow it to have some flux. This is a mathematical formula that shows you the typical way, the typical pattern that nature follows. Is nature past the math? Yes, it sure is. Will it always follow this math? No, it won't, because that's just the math for this universe, and there's likely trillions of them. And there are likely other universes with totally different maths. That's fine. That's fine. We're just saying, in this reality, this is a great way to get a baseline to understand, okay, this is how the electric constant interacts with the speed of light to bring about the Planck constant. It's sort of like with electricity. You have, if you want to find the watts of something, the work accomplished, you would multiply your voltage and your amperage, and these two combined will give you the watts, the work accomplished. And it's the same idea with the Planck constant. It takes this light constant and electric constant, and it gives you the Planck constant, which is the work accomplished between these two forms of energy. And this mathematical formula comes up with this number called the fine structure constant, which we're looking at here. The fine structure constant is commonly denoted with the symbol of A, and is a unitless and dimensionless physical constant, which is fitting, of course, right? It's a unitless and dimensionless physical constant, because light and electric and Planck are unitless and dimensionless. They're theories of how these energies, potentials, behave. Okay? So again, hold it loosely. Don't get tied in. Hold it loosely. Observe this and be in awe of it. You see, that's all it's to be happening here. It is widely accepted that the value of A is related to the electromagnetic force between subatomic charged particles and therefore determines how an atom holds its electrons. And this is why this formula is so important. This is how the ether structures and holds itself as a crystallized form of matter. It happens with this electromagnetic force between subatomic charged particles. And the math for that is this formula right there. And that's why it's important. Because it therefore determines the shape of the universe. So this formula is where we get the vortex geometry. This is the geometry that the Egyptians were talking about on the pyramids, or the Great Pyramid culture was inscribed on the pyramids, and their form and shape and where they're pointing in the universe and their mathematics. It's all based on the fine structure constant. All of it is based on that, and that's why it's important. That's why it's necessary and needed to know this. So here's the formula, a little bit larger. Okay, so check this out. This is wild. And we'll be wrapping it up with this final set of ideas here I'm going to bring you. 1 over 137 is known as the alpha constant, or fine structure constant, which is the strength of the electromagnetic force that governs how electrically charged elementary particles, electrons, and light, photons, interact. The alpha constant keeps reality together at the quantum level. And we talked about this in the initial videos when we were talking about how light, the light photon creates an electromagnetic field, and the electromagnetic field directs where the light travels, because the light wants to travel in a straight line, but the electromagnetic field it generates moves it, shifts it, changes it as it is affected by the electromagnetics that form the universe, you see? Okay. That's what this formula is pointing towards. The force that governs the light photon and the electromagnetics. You see? It's all one. So in this theory of the fine structure constant 137, as part of a geometrical process, forms the golden ratio and golden angle, and with it the Fibonacci spirals that we see almost everywhere in nature. Now you see this fine structure constant, alpha constant, is what forms this geometry that you're looking at here, that I got here. This golden angle, golden ratio, and then this golden spiral here, which you saw when you were looking at the toroidal fields that I showed you in just a couple of slides ago. This angle, this spiral, this descending or ascending, however which way you want to look at it, spiral that goes on infinitely. Okay, the base math of that is this fine structure constant. The macrocosm and the microcosm equate in objective reality, just as spirit and matter equate in the mind. So in the same way, the universe and biological life equate to and are expressions of the fine structure constant. Everything is reflecting each other. We've talked about that because nature works in patterns, and these patterns reflect each other. Okay, so here's the amazing thing I discovered. This is wild. The molecular formula. Okay, so now this is really wild. So 137.5 degrees is the golden angle, and you just saw that on the slide before this. The molecular formula for chlorophyll is this. I'm not going to read all of it, but it's basically 55 carbons, 72 hydrogen, these are atoms, 72 hydrogen, 1 magnesium, 4 nitrogen, and 5 oxygen atoms, which astonishingly sum to 137, the fine structure constant. Now this is wild. The molecular formula for chlorophyll, the atom count equates to 137, which is the angle, the golden angle. And you guys know it's chlorophyll. Well, here, read. Chlorophyll receives light photons from the sun, which is chemically transformed into energy for plants, and so sustains all plant life, which sustains all life on this planet. Everything is held in a fine balance by ratios of specific numbers that all equate to 3 and 6, governed by 9, and I'll show you that in a minute. The point I'm making here is all of life on this planet depends on the Calvin cycle, essentially, which is at the basis of photosynthesis. This is how light is transformed into sugar. That's what plants can do. We can't do it. Only plants can do this. They can transform light energy, photons, literally into substance energy, glucose. And this is what supports all life on this planet. Okay? Now, so check this out. Scientists consider 137 as a magical number, denoted by the Greek letter alpha, or A, and is known as the fine structure constant, a fundamental constant with a value that nearly equals 1 over 137, and this is the number here to be precise. The fine structure constant is one of the key physical constants of the universe. Now, this is what blew my mind. I saw this number and I thought to myself, you know, I'm just going to add it up and see what it comes to. All right, so check it out. I've got this all mapped here for you. So I added up these numbers, and they summarized, and I show you here how I did it. They summarized back to 3, right? I took that 3 and I added it. I did this. I didn't read this anywhere. I completely did it on my own. I took the 3 and I added it to 1, 1, 3, and 7. I got 15, which equates to 6. So at the basis of photosynthesis, at the basis of the molecular formula of chlorophyll, here we have 3, 6, and 9, which are essentially teasing you. This is nature teasing you and showing you, haha, here I've got these magical numbers 3, 6, and 9 at the very basic substance that supports all life on this planet through photosynthesis. And at the basis of photosynthesis, just through these little additional numbers, you get 3, 6, and 9 underlying the whole thing, which I thought was incredible. Electrons from the radiation of the sun are absorbed in light-sensitive green pigments inside chloroplasts located within the thylakoid stacks of plant leaves. I'm going to describe to you photosynthesis. These electrons from the sun are used by the plant to ionize water molecules, H2O, into hydrogen, H2, and oxygen, O2. Through enzymatic exchange, remember how I said right at the beginning of my first video, I think we are not cellular structures, we are enzymatic structures? Okay, because it's through enzymes and the directives of enzymes and how the enzymes talk to the cells, which brings about the activity of the cells, which carry out life. Okay, through enzymatic exchange within protein clusters inside the cell, oxygen atoms formed from water are released into the atmosphere, while hydrogen atoms are collected using ATP enzymes. Enzymes collect and transport hydrogen from water and electrons from the sun, light, to bind with carbon dioxide absorbed from the atmosphere in what is called the Calvin cycle. The Calvin cycle synthesizes the sugar that motivates all life on this planet. And at the basis of that entire photosynthesis is 3, 6, and 9. And in case anybody was wondering, this is how it actually happens. You have light that comes in, look at the diagram here, you have light that comes in and strikes the chloroplasts within the structure of the plant cells. And that radiation causes a chemical reaction with water. So this radiating energy, wave function, causes chemical reaction with water that the plant is absorbing through the roots. And this separates, with enzymes, it separates oxygen and hydrogen. And so the oxygen is released, which is how a forest oxygenates the world. And then the carbon dioxide of the atmosphere is combined with the hydrogen that is extracted, that the plant extracted from the water. And the combination of the carbon dioxide and hydrogen forms sugar, CH2O. And the most amazing thing that made me laugh out loud when I saw it, and here, look how at the basis of all of life is a light reaction and a dark reaction. I mean, the patterns are so clear, it becomes funny at times. The first time I saw this, I thought it said, by Jove, there on the top right. And I started laughing because right there is yin and yang, right there in the basis of all of life, in the Calvin cycle, where there's a light reaction that happens with the sunlight, and there's a dark reaction that happens down in the roots. And this is what supports all of life. That's yin and yang right there in front of you. Light and dark reactions create energy, sugar, and oxygen, fuel from radiance and water. Radiance obviously being the sun. The radiance or male light action creates oxygen, while the water or female dark action creates sugar. You see, there's the sun and moon. Remember, it was the metaphor of radiance, light male, over the waters, darkness female, that begat life, and we talked about that earlier. Quantum hack, how life sustains itself is the same way God manifests. Contrasting dynamisms. Now you see it, now you don't. Light and dark. It's even in the biology that supports all of life on this planet. We find, now you see it, now you don't. Contrasts, light and dark. It's all right there at the basis of everything. And so, to finish up here, as you guys saw in this map from part 1, we have the ether there at the top, and then the platonic solid that represents it. Its state is space, its material is void, the boson, when we talked about the boson earlier. Its physics is dimension, right? It creates dimension. It creates time, it creates energy. It is energy. It creates time, and it manifests crystallized energy. Dimension. It creates dimension, space and time, matter. Ether does. Its chemistry is plasma. See how fitting that is? Remember how I said, I think it was in part 2, how plasma contains all the building blocks of all of the universe. All the ions, all the building blocks are there in plasma. Its characteristic is consciousness. I mean, how fitting is that? This was, I mean, I made this map before I'd done any of this deeper research. Its mode is love. Obviously, you're composed of love. That's what I'm composed of. I've said that many times. Its sense is the gut, and its kingdom is angelic, obviously. And this is what composes you. You know what this means? It means that you're angelic in sense. See, the church never wanted you to know that. Never wanted you to have that idea in your mind, because it would free you, it would liberate you. Because your sense is your gut, and you're composed of love. You see, that makes you, that brings you into the angelic kingdom. You are past what you see in the mirror, because you reside in the angelic kingdom. Your identity is the ether. Your identity is the energy that the ether represents. And that same ether energy is what represents God. You see, and so you begin to put this stuff together. You begin to realize, going back to that slide I showed you earlier, check this out. I want you to see this. I came up with this slide here. You realize that there's the truth there in the middle. Pantheism, polytheism, monotheism. Single-sided view, multi-sided view, pantheistic view. Which one of those is not reality? Seriously, which one is incorrect? They look all correct to me, because they all are the basis of reality. You see? And so what I was attempting to do in this part 3b was to show you that all of reality is composed simply of waves, and they are identified, recognized through your consciousness, through looking at patterns. And it is these waves that are composed by the ether. And so therefore, the ether, the monad, are what compose all of the universe, all of everything. It comes back to one function, wave function, like John explained in the video. And this is not a degradation to say that. This is basically terming everything as magical, giving it the reverence it demands, actually. Because when you realize the miracle that you are and the miracle that you reside, all that's left is to be standing in awe of it. And I guess that's what I've been trying to facilitate in these videos. Love you guys. I'll see you next time.
There are different truths because our universe is hierarchically structured in layers. The atomic has its own truth. The nuclear world has its own completely different truth. And they're both valid. They're both self-consistent. So there's the truth of diversity, where observer and observed are separately identifiable systems. And there's the deeper truth of unity, in which there is no separation between the observer and the observed. So we can talk about life at all levels. Each level is valid, but the deepest level in this scientific age is the level of unity. What has to be very clear about this is a concept most people don't get quite. It's very important. You can drag me across the floor by my arm, You can drag me across the floor by my atoms, or by my nuclei, or by my cells. It all has the same effect. I get dragged across the floor. These are simply different levels of the description of the one reality that is me. So it's legitimate for us to talk about a world of diversity. We see such a world after all. But it's even more legitimate for us also to talk about the world of unity, the ultimate scientific truth of life. So we get tripped up in semantics if we say that unity alone exists, but there's no such thing as diversity, or that diversity alone exists, there's no such thing as unity. They're both true. They're just different levels of description of the same reality. On the physical level, you and I are separate. You're much better looking than I am, more attractive in virtually every way. But at deeper levels, we have a common source. And that is the unified field, the scientifically discovered unified field that is the source of you and the source of me, the source of gravity, the source of electromagnetism, the source of quarks, the source of leptons. Everything in the universe is a common source. So if we look at things at the deepest possible level, we ultimately discover one unified universal reality, of which you're a wave, of which I am a wave. We're all just the different vibrational frequencies, the natural reverberant frequencies of this one universal unified field. Our whole universe is just a symphony. The various, harmonics and fundamentals and overtones of one universal field, one universal ocean of consciousness in motion.